Hi everybody, Levi Clay here, and I'm back again for another guitar lesson. This time I'm going to be presenting things in a slightly different way from normal because this video actually goes out to Chris, who's one of my patrons over on patreon.com. Chris has reached out and made it clear to me that I actually have a small following in the blind community. So Chris will often ask me questions and clarification on some of the subjects in my videos, because obviously in a video I'm showing things, and it's often very easy to forget that explaining things is very important. Now, I think all guitar teachers are very guilty of this. Because we can show things to people, we maybe don't go into as much detail as we could or even should. So this video goes out to Chris, and it's on the subject of vibrato, and we're going to talk about the technique of vibrato, how it's applied, so you can really understand the ins and outs of it. That doesn't mean that if you're not blind, this video isn't for you. One of the other aspects of my videos is, of course, helping teachers to improve what they do. And really understanding what you do and being able to explain what you do to people in words is a very useful skill. So I'm going to break the components of vibrato down now, and maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you'll be able to explain things a little bit clearer to people in future. So what is vibrato? Well, vibrato comes from the Italian past tense of the form to vibrate. So vibrato means to vibrate or to shake a note. Now this is something prevalent in the voice because we can achieve smooth glissando in the voice, a smooth changing of pitch in the voice. When singers sing, they will often apply vibrato to help add sustain and to carry a note. It's a very expressive sound. In essence, vibrato is a rapid change in pitch of a note, or rapid controlled change in pitch of a note. So yeah, vibrato, very human. It's a very human thing to apply to a note, and because of that we associate it with expression. You can apply great vibrato to the violin, you cannot apply vibrato to the piano, and for that reason pianists need to be more dynamic in their playing to create a sense of expression, because they can't use things like vibrato or bends or slides in order to express themselves in the same way we can with the human voice. Anyway, now you understand what vibrato is, let's talk about how that works on the guitar. Now, of course, the guitar is a tricky instrument to apply vibrato on, and we're going to get into the first concept of understanding and explanation now. When we apply vibrato to a note, it's important to understand that there is the concept of the given note, or the stated note, the intended note, however you want to think of that. If I play the note D, I'm applying vibrato to the note D. I'm not just wildly shaking around and hoping that people can imagine the note D. D is the note, vibrato is applied to that note. On the guitar, because, unless you have a whammy bar, of course, because the only way we can put energy into these strings is to bend them, we can't lower the pitch of a note. Our vibrato is a little less natural than it is in the human voice. We can only take our stated note D and raise the pitch up and lower the pitch back to the stated note. You can't really go below it. Talk about that as the video goes on. So vibrato on the guitar will sound like this. Now, when I do that, I understand the mechanics of this motion, and I can explain it to you. So one of the things I asked Chris is, has someone ever talked to you about this idea of turning a key in a lock? And I like to use this with my students, talking about this idea of taking a key out of your pocket with your left hand, putting it in your door, and then unlocking the door. It's this motion of turning the wrist, turning of the forearm and the wrist as one unit, where the power comes for our bend. In order to execute this on the guitar, we need a fulcrum, or a pivot point. And that pivot point will be the knuckle of your first finger. This is the point from which everything turns. I'll explain that in a second, but for clarification, when I say your first knuckle, I'm talking about the knuckle that connects the palm of your hand to the fingers. So that knuckle comes into contact with the bottom side of the neck, and then this turning motion happens around that point. So for those of you that can see this, that's very clear. How do you explain that to someone that can't see it? In essence, the best thing to do is to straighten out all of your fingers, so you have like a slapping hand, I guess. Put your knuckle in contact with the neck, so your fingers are pointing down towards the floor, or the side of the fingers, parallel to the floor. I guess your fingers are actually pointing straight forward. They'll stay pointing forward, but I'm going to turn my hand so the palm of my hand becomes parallel with the bottom of the neck. So it goes from perpendicular to the side of the neck, or to the neck, yeah, and then parallel to the neck. Getting used to that as a feeling is where the power and control in bends and vibrato happens from, in a rock vibrato, I should say. Now I'll demonstrate that. So bending is not done with the fingers. Your fingers aren't strong. When I do a huge bend like this, that's a really big bend, right? There's no effort in that. And I play, I think I've got 10s, maybe 11s on this guitar, and it's 25.6 inch scale length. So bending isn't easy on this guitar, but that was a big bend. And there was no stress doing it because the power came from the forearm and the wrist. I didn't try and do that bend by opening my fingers because there's no power in the hand opening. This is not what our hand has evolved to do. Our hand has evolved to grab things. That's what we do. That's where the strength is. And you can demonstrate this just by walking up to a friend, asking him to turn his hand into a fist, and then take your hand and place it around his fist, and then ask him to open his hand. He won't be able to do it because you squeezing is considerably more powerful than him being able to open. Same as when, doing something stupid like wrestling an alligator. You put your hands around its jaw because it has great strength at closing, but not that same amount of strength in opening its jaw. So understanding that is very important because it means we can focus on applying our bends and our vibrato in the correct way. So when I understand this pivoting motion around that fulcrum, around that pivot point, when I put my fingers onto the strings, the fingers shouldn't move. And when I say move, I mean they're not bending. They're not absorbing the energy. As my hand and wrist turns, my fingers will follow that motion. But I'm not actually straightening or bending my fingers in any way when I do that. And the same will apply when I put my first finger down on the 7th fret of the G string and I bend or apply vibrato downwards. I'm pulling that string down and I'm pivoting on that knuckle at the bottom of the neck. So when I do that, it's natural that the string will be pulled by the finger. The finger is not really doing anything other than following the path of the turning wrist. And that will sound like this. That can be done slow. It can be done fast. It can be done thin. It can be done wide. Really is down to you how you choose to express yourself there. It's all about that turning motion in the wrist. Now practicing that as both a pull, i.e. the wrist turning and coming down, and pushing, so the wrist beginning perpendicular to the neck and pushing upwards. On the first finger, second finger, third finger, and even the fourth finger. When I do that, my finger, my knuckle stays in contact with the bottom of the neck, and the pushing motion is where that comes from. That's really important to understand, where that motion and control comes from. Now, let's talk about applying vibrato to bends, because this seems to be one of the most requested subjects when it comes to vibrato. When you're applying vibrato to a bend, the stated pitch, the intended pitch, is the most important thing. If I'm bending from the note D up to E, you want to hear the note E, right? And the vibrato is applied to that note. So I don't hit the note D and then just shake wildly and hope that you hear E. That doesn't sound like E, right? Doesn't really sound like anything. Grabs your attention, but doesn't sound like E. So it's worth practicing bending to your E, holding the note for a second, and then what we're going to do is release the pitch and then bend back up to the stated or intended pitch. So E. So, for those watching, you'll see that anytime bend or vibrato is applied there, that knuckle is in contact with the side of the neck. It doesn't mean that knuckle will always be in contact with the side of the neck. As the thumb comes behind the neck and you start doing wider stretches, the knuckle is lower. It's much harder to apply a bend or vibrato when that knuckle isn't in place. Some guys manage it, guys like Chris Poland, they can somehow do it, but it's honestly much harder to get the control needed to do that. So that's the important aspects of bending: the knuckle, the pivot, and that fulcrum point. Also worth discussing the Eric Clapton or B.B. King approach to vibrato, because this really helps to demonstrate the difference between these two concepts and the difference between a pivot, which is an effective transfer of energy, and having the thumb off the neck. So what do I mean by that? Well, when Eric Clapton applies vibrato, what you will see is he will have his thumb at the top of the neck when playing normal fretted guitar. As soon as he wants to apply vibrato to a note, though, he tends to jump, take the thumb off the back of the neck, just have the finger in contact, the tip of the finger, and at that point he shakes the entire arm. Now, what's that all about? Well, you know, it's an imitation of B.B. King, in my opinion. The difference between these two things is the pivot point has changed. We're no longer having a pivot point with the knuckle on the bottom of the neck. Your pivot now is kind of more your elbow as your entire arm moves up and down. This will result in a less effective transfer of energy into the string. You can make a wider movement, but because it's just your fingertip touching the string, what will tend to happen is as you move your hand up and down, your finger will absorb a lot of that energy and you'll only transfer a small movement into the actual string. It's a very musical sounding vibrato. I'm a big fan of it for playing blues, but you totally couldn't get away with this on rock. In fact, let me just cut in an example of an extremely wide vibrato that I like to do. You could never get away with doing this without the fulcrum pivot on that knuckle on the side of the neck. Here I'm bending up to my E. Very controlled. So here's a clip. This is taken from Forever Again, Hellcat Molly, an old video that I put up on my YouTube. Probably, I think, the first video on this channel, actually. And yeah, it's done because it's in your face and it cuts through the mix, and especially when the vocal kicks in the second clip, you know, it really helps to keep the attention on the guitar for that second. That's what's needed. It's a vibrato so wide that you could drive a truck through it. Sounds like this. Now just imagine trying to apply that same vibrato that Eric Clapton uses. It's not going to cut through in the same way. That's a more vocal, more lyrical and expressive vibrato. Lastly, it's also worth addressing the side-to-side vibrato. This one, much more subtle. In essence, this comes from keeping the fingers in place but moving the entire hand. What this does is it adjusts the pressure with which you're playing the string. And these subtle releases in pressure will actually lower the pitch because you're not pressing so hard against the fret. And I like this on, on chords. You can obviously do this on a single note. Very subtle. It's often described as a classical vibrato because that's the way you apply vibrato when playing classical guitar. The effects there are amplified considerably. Huge difference in sound there. So in essence, that is the explanation of vibrato. That's how vibrato is applied to a note. That's how you can practice vibrato. get a real good understanding of that pivot point touching the bottom of the neck with that first knuckle, and understanding that turning and what that feels like is turning a key in a door. Aside from that, it's really a case of listening to your favorite recordings and being clinical, be analytical, try and imitate the vibrato. The example I often give is Guthrie Govan's Regret No. 9 solo. His vibrato on that is it's very hard to describe the vibrato. I mean, it's fast and wide. It's not what you would expect for that track, but it works. I've come to really enjoy that vibrato. The point is, if you're learning to play Regret No. 9, don't just play the notes that he plays. Listen to the vibrato he applies and try and imitate that sound. It doesn't sound like this. It's a slow solo. I mean, what I'm playing isn't even close to what he plays, but... So fast vibrato, and this is really a trademark as a player, right? Understanding how it's applied, though, is what's going to give you the control to do lots of different types of vibrato. So hopefully that was of some use to you, Chris. If not, I do apologise. Lastly, huge thank you to these people over here. These are some of my supporters over on patreon.com. Their support is obviously a huge help. So if you would like to be like those awesome people, you can check me out in the link in the description and join us for as little as $1, or pay a bit more and get your name up in lights. It's a huge help, and yeah, you people are awesome. Much love. So if you would like to check us out on Patreon, do so by clicking this button up here, subscribe by clicking this little button down here, find 2 more of my videos here and here. Thanks so much for all the support, guys. Don't be shy. If you have questions about things, Chris was cool and reached out to me and let me know that he would like more visual and vocal descriptions of things. I'm always happy to indulge. Much love. I will see you for another video soon. Bye.